We very quickly pivoted and we're like, coffee tables, side tables, beds. At the very same time, again, we're a bootstrapped young company. We started getting both our first requests for like someone who is on our newsletter that's like, I'm opening up a restaurant and I saw you guys make tables and stuff. Can you guys make tables for a restaurant? At first, we were like, we kind of scratched our head and we're like, I mean, they're a customer. We can make tables. So we said, let's go for it.
It sometimes takes a few swings at crafting the right product to meet market needs. For Ben Young and Fred Kukelhaus, the co-founders of Hugo and Hoby, it took them a few swings at creating a B2C company by creating a standing desk, a coffee table, and even beds before they finally hit their home run with B2B products. Today, Hugo and Hoby build custom furniture to create unique spaces, strengthen communities, and better our planet. This all stems from the co-founders' grandparents, Hugo and Hoby. Hugo and Hoby is almost 10 years old now, operating as a 7-figure business, and I've had the incredible privilege to watch from the sidelines since almost the beginning when I met them at Yale in the summer of 2015. To understand how they became a 7-figure business, let's dive into the beginning of their story. And to do that, let's jump into the notes here and actually start sketching that out a bit. So there is 2015, they start Hugo and Hoby, but Ben and Fred are on two different pathways. I guess career pathways, I think is the best way to put it. So Ben, before he started Hugo and Hoby for about 5 years or so, he was a high school math teacher. And he did this kind of throughout. So let's draw Ben as the teacher here and teaching with the whiteboard, whatever, probably a chalkboard still. I don't know. Ben's not that old. Okay. So there's Ben here, right? So he's teaching, he's a high school math teacher. And then Fred was a consultant. So I'm just going to draw like a really old, big building and sketchy corporate. Oh my gosh, that's not a building, whatever. Anyways, you get the point. It's a high school math teacher and Fred's a consultant. And they were doing this before they both jumped in to Yale School of Management in 2015. And they met really quickly once they got here. So it's 2015 here. And they met at Welcome Weekend, which is pretty much like this big orientation. And very soon after, they became roommates. So very quickly, like they're getting to know each other just as friends. They have no intention of starting a business together. That was not the point of it at all. They might have some entrepreneurial leanings, but they went into this kind of this Welcome Weekend as like, hey, we like hanging out with each other. Let's be roommates. And to help kind of get their apartment going, what they ended up doing, right, is they're building furniture in their basement. So they're building like tables and I think like beds and coffee tables and, simple things. There wasn't like super complex, especially because you're in a basement and you can't there's only so much you can do. But they're doing these little things. And by building these things themselves, they're realizing, both of them together, like, why are we not going to the store to buy these items? And that's when they kind of realized, like, maybe there's an actual opportunity to do something. And they kind of saw a few different things, right? So they're at the School of Management, and it's an MBA program. And they get to see a lot of the trends and see what's happening, kind of like a startup entrepreneurship world and just like business in general. And I would say here, right, this is kind of a tipping point, and this is kind of where my own entrepreneurial journey was starting. And e-commerce was really starting to take off. So let me give you a couple contexts, right? So Warby Parker that's the hype train, right? The hype train at this point for Warby Parker is like going like crazy. Allbirds, which has become another, not as popular these days, but at the time it was just getting started. They had just launched their Kickstarter in 2014 for their Kickstarter. And at this point, Kickstarter was all the rage. And I mean, it was all the rage, especially in entrepreneurial scenes. Like everyone was like, how do we build a Kickstarter campaign? That was like such a big thing. I went through it. Actually, my first company did a Kickstarter campaign because of this hype. And Kickstarter at this point, right, I think they're 2 years old. But they had just reached $100 million in total money raised on Kickstarter's platforms. Like, there's a lot of interesting trends happening for e-commerce here. And when I was talking to Ben, he was kind of noticing these trends. But instead of me explaining what Ben was seeing, let me actually have Ben describe these trends himself.
There was 50 to 100 great brands where everyone's like, oh my God, you got to get your glasses there and your shirts here and hats from this company. And we just felt like nobody had really done it in furniture. There weren't lots of brands people could point to quickly and say, oh, I love buying furniture from this e-commerce company. It was very new. Like people were afraid to buy big things online. And there was one clothing company called Gustin, and they had basically taken this model of they started with a Kickstarter campaign, and then they were like, wow, that was amazing. Like we got pre-orders, we built the product, we sent them to customers. Let's do the same thing internally on our website. Like just keep doing Kickstarter campaigns for every product. So we were kind of using them, and we're like, wow, that's a really interesting business model. You collect pre-sales, but like you kind of take Kickstarter out of it.
So that's Ben's description of the trends. And personally, I was feeling them a ton, as I just mentioned, right? There was a lot of different like pressure, or maybe just like everyone wanted to do these like pre-order campaigns all the time because it was beneficial for the business in so many different ways, because you didn't have to put upfront inventory. You could kind of see and test things, how things go. And it was such a hype train because this is really, at this time, it was still really new. Now we've gotten more used to this. I think it's just become kind of more common in e-commerce, especially for digital products. I would say I don't think it's as common as I thought it would be for more physical products, but maybe that's a case study later on. But okay, so we're seeing all these different trends about pre-orders and things like that. And because of these trends and like, hey, why aren't there furniture, especially that's affordable but looks good and it's like meant for maybe like grad students, I think is the way to think about it. That's where kind of Hugo and Hoby get started. And they had both, right? Both grandparents for Fred and Ben were craftsmen, and they're like being craftsmen and things like that, and just building high quality things is like that was a core value for them and still is today. So they're like, how do we build really quality furniture but at like an affordable price tag? And so with all of that, that's when they thought, okay, let's build a standing desk. And let's build a standing desk. But before we actually build the thing, let's actually see if we can get, someone to pre-order in the long run. Like our long-term business model is like, let's say we post like, images and mock-ups, and we can then sell this to our email list and be like, hey, like if we get 50 pre-orders for this, we'll actually build it. And so you're not actually building the product. You're not actually doing this, right? That's my best version of a hammer. Wow, that's terrible hammer. But let's say like, right, you're not going to build the standing desk. You're just going to like make mock-ups. And we didn't have AI or anything like that in 2015 at the time, so we couldn't even do that. You'd have to sketch things out or hire someone to do it. Or maybe you can build a prototype too, right? And so they end up sketching, like kind of building this thing up. But their whole business model is like, before we put any money and any resources into actually building their product, here's kind of like the pre-order campaign, and we have to get maybe 50 or 25, whatever the minimum it is. Like that's what we need to get first before we actually start building. So they have this really cool innovative business model to bring into furniture, but like, does anyone actually want this? And that's when Ben and Fred, instead of just, building this big old new business model, all these different things out, they ended up just kind of building 5 to 6 desks. And this is where I think it was pretty clever. They just sold them on Craigslist. And they moved pretty quick, and they would ship them. Even like one person from like New York bought one. It was just only 5 to 6, and with these 5 to 6 desks, they're like, hey, because they sold quickly and we were able to sell them, like there's actually money here, and there's actually interest. And they were able to then take this little bit of traction, and then get accepted into the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute (YEI). I'll just put YEI here, in their summer fellowship program. And the summer fellowship program was a 10-week program. This is where I met them here in this program. And they did this program to help start building out this larger vision for this business model and get this desk to be more manufacturable here, right? So this desk to make it much more manufacturable. So they did this. They were doing this work throughout the summer. And they spent the entire summer of 2015 building out what it would be like to manufacture this whole desk. And this is a really key concept because this is something that was new to me actually this same summer. And there's a big difference between prototype and manufacturing. And they learned, right, that they can build things by hand and they can prototype. And this is like relatively easy. It's not the hardest thing, especially for a standing desk. That the prototype was sweet. I spent a lot of time actually working on this desk, and it had like this cool little hook, and it had a hand crank instead of the electronics, and Standing desks were still relatively like a newer thing. They were like a newer trend. But this desk was awesome. I loved working on it. I don't have any photos of it. I wish I did. But this desk was really awesome, and I loved working on it. But they spent, I guess, the whole summer, right? How do you go from maybe like 5 to 6 of these, right? So 5 to 6 to like 100 of them, or even 1,000 of them? How do you do this shift? And this is when they learned a lot. But instead of me describing what they learned and what the kind of the challenges that came with it, here's Ben to describe all the challenges that came with manufacturing this standing desk.
We're starting a furniture company from scratch. So the first thing we're doing is like identifying suppliers of like who's going to make the tops and the legs and the bases. And what I think we didn't realize at the time was that anything that has mechanical parts that move just adds an enormous amount of complexity. Even though you're just moving a top up and down, it adds an enormous amount of cost to be able to do it well and for the product to actually work. And two, you need a lot of kind of the right suppliers to do it correctly. So we were talking to a lot of shops that were helping us sort of figure out how we were going to build it and for what cost. And when we kept running the numbers, like we'd come up with a cool design, we'd be really happy with it. We go to our suppliers, we price it out. And we kept looking at it and we were like, one, it's a little risky because again, the mechanical parts have more of a tendency to like, you have to get it right. You can't have any parts fail. And two, the price was just getting very high. We were like, this price point is not actually the model we've been trying to create, which is like making beautiful furniture affordable for people. And so we had been down this route for the sit to stand desk for a while, and we're excited by the prototype and all that. But we were kind of like, we felt like we were hitting a wall where we couldn't put the product out there and get sales. And we just felt like it was slowing us down.
There's clearly a lot of differences and a lot of challenges that come with scaling up from, maybe 5 to 6 to then maybe 100 or 1,000 units, as Ben just described, with all the challenges that come with supply chain and things not being consistent of like, oh, and then which parts and who's actually going to build this. There's a lot of different things. But one of the things that really noticed when I was talking to Ben that I really noticed was he was mentioning it goes against what we were trying to build. And I think that's a really key point, right? So Ben here, right, he was mentioning that like, hey, we wanted to build something that was more affordable. So maybe it's a $1 sign, a $2 sign, but the manufacturing wasn't allowing them to do them, even if, right, their whole model predicated on kind of cutting out this like middleman, which then takes out money too, right? So they're kind of getting rid of these retailers here, right? That was the whole concept. But even with, right, is building this prototype, you go from here, but they were still having to sell this at a really high price point because they're building high quality stuff. And high quality and like solid wood and things like that, right? That's all real money. You can't just like outsource that or get really cheap on that, especially, right, if you want to build a high quality item. So with this whole process, they realized at the end of that summer that really what they needed to do is actually kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit and just go back to this prototyping and more of this like the hand building, more of them building stuff and just get revenue in the door, because they didn't have the ability really to raise money, nor did they really want to. It was really like, let's build a company that really sticks to our values and what they want to do with it. So, and that at the end of that summer and more in the fall of 2015, they end up selling just like really basic items like a coffee table and beds and like going back to the stuff they can build in their basements. And this worked, right? It gave them, like they could sell it on Craigslist, they could sell it. But the problem is, right, and there is a lot of really cool things they can do with this. It's kind of cool to see it in like a friend's bedroom or a friend's, family room. That's all really neat and cool. But the problem is that this economically doesn't work. So let me give you the math essentially of what they were doing, right? So when I was talking to Ben, he mentioned that they made $70K in B2C sales. And you're like, wow, that's pretty impressive. And you're right. That is pretty impressive. But the problem is you only made 20K or ish of profit. And there's a lot of work that comes of building all these different items, because you have the work, or labor, I think is the better way to put it. Labor, and you have all the cost of goods, which I'll just put COGS, right? So there's a lot of costs that come with building a physical product like them, right? This is the big difference between software and hardware, or like physical goods, right? Is your margins are much different. So you have all of this, right? And so that this math just it's not really working because they were graduating in the May of 2016, and they're like, how do we go full time and still have, some money to live off of, even just a little bit? So the interesting piece, right, is like they're doing all these B2C sales, and they're starting to get some traction with like the newsletter, things like that. People are, gaining onto their emails and whatnot. But then someone emails them for who's building a brand new restaurant. Can I draw a restaurant? Ooh, that's not terrible. So someone started a new restaurant, and they asked if they could build all the tables for that new restaurant. So what was interesting is what they learned here, right, is that you have, right, one customer, but instead of buying, one table or one bed or one coffee table, right, the one person is buying like 50 items at a time. And the amount of money here is much different, right? This is like $5 signs compared to like the $1 sign of B2C, right? So here's like the big difference, right, between B2B here and this B2C model. So they do this, right? And this all works out really nicely for them. And they continue to kind of do this. And they still have B2C going a little bit. But this is when they realize maybe we should actually be a B2B company and start focusing on, like using our alma mater networks, things like that, and starting to do more restaurants and more bigger opportunities where we have to talk to one customer and they buy a whole set of things. And that's what they end up doing. And the one key piece that was interesting in talking to Ben about this is he actually thought this actually aligned way more with their values, because with the B2B, right, they have more of a budget. But there's also, right, you get more time, and they want more things that are more durable, because if you're buying more enterprise or more, things that you're going to be in your office space, right, you want things that are going to last for 10 years plus. Like, that's a big goal. And, so that way you can just set it and forget it. And it's going to be durable. It's going to be clean probably more because you have custodians and things like that. There's a lot of different reasons why a B2B model here actually fits more like their craftsmen, supporting craftsmen, sustainability, for durability here. Sustainability and durability are pretty connected here. But also, right, they can kind of build high quality goods, which B2C isn't always looking for, right? If you look at IKEA, these lower furniture stores, they're big, they're monster companies because B2C isn't always looking for high quality. They just want to get the job done, essentially, right? And the market they were attacking, right, like, these grad students, they're not always going to have the biggest budget. Students don't have big budgets. They have very tiny ones. They're still a big market, but they're still not the largest market out there. So this B2B model, right, gave them the ability to then support craftsmen who can then build out the furniture for them. So now today, and this is what they started building out as they built out the B2B model, they've actually built a network of different craftsmen across the country that they can go to and help create these different furniture pieces. So if someone, let's say in Seattle, like, if I draw the United States, holy cow, this is a terrible United States. That's terrible. All right. But if, let's say someone builds in Seattle, right, they can contact from, New Haven, Connecticut, they can contact their craftsmen here in Seattle and go, hey, here's the building here's the project, here's the, things like that. And so they're creating with the craftsmen, supporting the local economy there, building with sustainable, trees and things like in wood that's based out of this area, and they're shipping to that customer here in Oregon. And this whole structure and this model has really worked. Now they've actually built furniture for like airports, in offices, in full apartment buildings, like not just one apartments, like hundreds, at a time, that are full of, furnished, things like that. So you're getting these really monster orders from, maybe one person who's now buying 100 pieces, or like really pieces that are really big and monster orders. So with all of that, just within about 2 years or so, they were able to get to $250K in annual revenue. I'll just put ARR. It's not ARR technically, but you get the point. So in 2 years, they get there. And within about a year or two after that, they are able to get to the $1 million mark in annual revenue, which is pretty sweet. So really big jumps. And that's a really big testament of how impactful, right, just getting a few big clients with B2B going, and then things start snowballing from that. And I should mention here too, they've actually been able to contract 60,000 hours to these craftsmen, which is that's a lot of hours. And with their, their 1% and they're giving back into communities, they've actually been able to plant 85,000 new trees in more endangered forests that are, critical maybe for forest fires, those kind of things. But they've been able to plant new trees, 85,000 of them, based on their model and how they go about doing business. So it's pretty incredible work. They're able to build a sustainable business that's building, high quality furniture. It's built sustainably. They can help local craftsmen, and they make a lot of money doing so. And so that's the general story of Hugo and Hoby, but let's actually go into how they've been able to get those clients for B2B specifically. And I would say there's actually one main, umbrella, which would be connections and network. But within this, right, there's a few nuances to this, and I would say there's kind of 3 different ways they've been able to network and build connections to gain clients. And the first one I would say is alma mater connections. Now, they've been able to use, and this isn't always used effectively, and a really big kudos to Fred and Ben for using their networks in a really strategic way. And the way to think about this in this case, right, is they weren't just going to the universities of Yale and Swarthmore to build, maybe, hey, like, can you just connect us, to the so-and-so? No. Like, they weren't doing that, or they weren't even going to these universities and being like, hey, can you just buy our furniture? And they definitely could, but they didn't. What they would do effectively, I don't think they did this through LinkedIn, but here's the way I kind of processed it when I was talking to Ben, is essentially, right, so you go into LinkedIn, let's say, and you go into the filter and you search by, university. So it'd be like, in their case, Yale and Swarthmore, and you would connect with people from what Ben was saying that were like head restaurants or offices, and they would just send them a note like, hey, we're building furniture, maybe play the student card up a little bit, could we talk to you about doing, maybe building furniture for you if you have any needs, those kind of things. And this is how they got their first clients. And this is actually one of the big breaks that when I was talking to Ben about this is actually one of the things that they got from doing this, outreach, essentially cold outreach. But one of the big connections that they got was actually from a Yale alum who was like, hey, I have a startup. I'm actually building an apartment complex. Can you go fill, tens of apartments, would just furnish them with furniture, and tens of pieces of furniture is a really big deal. So just based on one person that had their own kind of startup, they were able to get, an order probably of like 25K plus, if that's probably a low number. So just by doing a little bit of cold outreach here, by using these alma maters, it worked out. Now, cold outreach isn't really the best way to describe this because it's not super cold. I think the best way, if I had to put a number on it, right, cold outreach is like, it's 1% success rate at best. It's a really low, and actually, like, I saw an argument a few weeks ago that actually was like, hey, you shouldn't have a cold outreach even in your strategies, which is pretty interesting. But cold outreach, right, is a really low success rate because people don't know you, they have no trust with you, you have no relationship, yada, yada, right? It just doesn't work typically. But in this way, right, and having things at Yale and Swarthmore, and, people really love where they went to school. It's a big deal. So instead of it being 1%, I would say, and I would argue, right, at least 10% are reading it, right? Because half the time, right, if you get these emails, half the time you're just like archive, bye-bye. These emails, right, at least you're getting reads, because if it's like, hey, I'm a Yale, like, you can even start that email with like, I'm a Yale student, right? Or if you're on LinkedIn, right, it's gonna, if you put in your bio like Yale student, or even just put Yale, this, whatever, right? Like, have Yale somewhere in that little headline, and that could open a lot of doors for you just by connecting with people there and all those kind of things. So I actually think this is super smart, and obviously this gave them a huge break because another person in their network had an opportunity that gave them a big check right up front. And these big checks were a big deal up front because they help keep the lights on, and right, the longer they can go, the better the opportunity and the wider the time, right? They would have to build these connections and build the opportunity. Kind of this like serendipity, like how long can you last? Then you get a few lucky moments, that really set this thing up to really be successful. So that's how Ben and Fred use their alma maters to network and gain clients. But let's go into the second type of kind of connection network that they would use. And I'm going to call this adjacent partners. And these adjacent partners are actually pretty similar to the Erin Rollenhagen video and how she used kind of different, maybe like different agencies and things like that to actually help bring in clients as well that she could partner with and work with. And this is a very similar concept, right? So it's effectively the one example that Ben gave me is how this works is, right, so you have Hugo and Hoby and they build furniture, right? But who needs furniture? Well, architects need furniture to put into their projects and their planning and their buildings, right? So you have architects here. And these architects then sell to places like universities and these massive clients, right? Like these really big opportunities. And so these architects have to, what they need to do, right, is like, here's this full building, but here's the furniture, right? Here's the lights, here's the glass, right? Like there's so much design and planning and things like that. And these architects, right, what they're going to do is then pitch these different products of all this, but they pitch it to the universities. So essentially what you're having happen is that these architects are pitching, products like Hugo and Hoby here. So they're pitching, this Hugo and Hoby product to these universities, and Hugo and Hoby doesn't have to pitch themselves. So if you build a really nice connection with these architects and you're a really good partner with them and it really fits into how they go about things, essentially these architects will sell to these big clients for you. And this is exactly what happened for Hugo and Hoby. What happened is actually it sold to their alma mater, Swarthmore, and they're actually able to get furniture into these buildings that they didn't even actually talk to the university, or maybe they didn't even have to really sell them because the architect did that work for them. So it's a pretty interesting way of doing business, is that you can just kind of build this, this network of architects, because, right, one architect is not only going to sell to one university, they're going to sell to like this business here, this airport here, right? They're constantly in deal mode. And then so they're kind of doing deal flow, especially if they like working with you, all this kind of stuff. So, and this kind of scales up, right? You can have a network of like, here's this one, and they're doing the same kind of pitch. So it creates this really kind of some networks effect a little bit as well, which is pretty sweet. So that's adjacent partners and businesses, but let's go into the third type of connection network that they've been able to use to build Hugo and Hoby. And this one seems like one that I just keep doing over and over again, and that is referrals from past and current clients. And this is a little bit different, right? It's the same concept for what I've been talking to, especially in the Erin Rollenhagen video. It's a very similar, right? If you do high quality work, people talk about it. But in this case for Hugo and Hoby, right, because they're building these tables and they're building these couches, right, you're getting these really, pieces that are going to be really physical. They're, you can touch them, you can feel them, you even smell them, I guess, right? But you can see a lot of different things, right? But one of the cool parts, and I think this is where, right, having high quality and having these, craftsmen, this turns it right into not just a piece of furniture, right? Office furniture, like people aren't necessarily talking about that, but they are going to talk about things that are high quality, are craftsmen, and in reality are really pieces of art. And art gets talked about, and it's a creative piece, right? Anything that's more of an art, more of a creative thing, and that's what you're getting with these craftsmen, high quality, things get talked about, right? Let me give you one example of how this might play out. So let's say you have this office building, right? And you just did the furniture and you put Hugo and Hoby, a bench or, a big couch in there or a big table, right? Let's say that's in this new office building, right? And then let's say you have a client that comes in, a new one that's not from this office building. They come in and then they see these tables and they're like, hey, this is really sweet. This isn't just normal, right? And they see the Hugo and Hoby. I can't draw their logo, but you can see, right? They see their Hugo and Hoby. You might ask, especially if it's a good relationship with that client who's coming in, right? Like, hey, where'd you get that table, or where'd you get this? Because it looks like a piece of art and it's high quality, it's sustainable. It's a really easy talking point, especially, small talk. It's an easy piece to do small talk, things like that with. And because Hugo and Hoby builds high quality furniture and they're building furniture that's more like art in places that aren't necessarily known to be creative or more like standing out, it's easier for Hugo and Hoby to be shareable, especially in office buildings and airports, in places where the art just doesn't really stand out. Now, if you want to learn more about Hugo and Hoby, you can go to hugoandhoby.com. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out the newsletter in the description below.